this is Guatemalan Jadeite, right? And then kind of holding it next to the Canadian Nephrite. There are definitely noticeable differences. You can kind of see how people would easily get confused, between nephrite and jadeite and kind of like misunderstanding the distinction between what we call the two jades. Shane, what do you think about nephrite and jadeite similarities and differences, and what is your advice to people who are wanting to learn how to distinguish them?
Nephrite and jadeite are interesting, and in the fact that they are fairly similar in their toughness, and that's kind of initially what confused people before they were looking at them under a microscope and being able to say like, hey, this is like a packed crystalline structure, and this is really fibrous, and so that like maybe these aren't the same stone. I mean, even when I started working with jade, the jadeite and nephrite, I was like, what is going on here? Like, I just want to carve jade. Why are there two different stones? They look similar, and yet there are big differences between them. As far as the kind of spectrum of colors you get. For example, that piece of Guatemalan jadeite, the Guatemalan jadeite tend to kind of run in this like gray blue range. And then, one of my favorite parts about them, and it's quite defined in that particular specimen, is the iron staining coming in from the edge that gives it that yellow. And to me, that is just the coolest contrast. I mean, I try and use that just about all the time when I'm cutting it. If I'm doing earrings or a pendant, I want to include that because it's a great contrast. With your Burmese jadeites that you work with, there's a crazy spectrum of colors, and they tend to be very, very bright. Whereas a lot of nephrites I find tend to be a little bit more muted, not exclusively, of course. I mean, it's hard to draw a general line anywhere within the jade world because you're always going to find outliers that are like really bright or really whatever. But they tend to be kind of more in the greens, although there's, I've got a pendant on here that's white and brown, and it's a nephrite from Siberia. So when you're first getting into it, the jade world is incredibly confusing because there are so many different names for stuff, and there's like colloquial terminology for stones coming from really specific locations. But the best way to start is just to talk to experts, listen to videos. Definitely don't look at Amazon. There are good resources online. So the best thing to do is just find somebody who's working with the stone, who has integrity, who's trying to sell you something that is what it is.
Yes. And that they can prove it and can say like, these are the characteristics of Guatemalan jade. This is how I know that it is what I say it is. And I think that a lot of online sources that are sketchy, what they're doing is they're calling things like, oh, it's a jade, or they're using vague terminology that they know people don't understand, and they're taking advantage of that consumer, for lack of a better word, ignorance. And then they're flooding the internet with that, like, just like sludge that you have to like trek through to try and get to like, okay, but what's actually true here and what's actually real and what do these words mean? And vocabulary, it's so hard understanding vocabulary with jade because of the Eastern influence and their own separate, because of the language, terminology, and then over here, because of the confusion that has been like perpetuated over generations, that spreading of misinformation just from people not knowing any better, that has led to some confusing vocabulary as well. Finding trustworthy resources, trusting the people that you're working with, that it's everything. And just so everybody knows, you can contact Shane directly. He is an expert in this, and you can find him on Instagram, and you can just talk to him, right?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, write to me. You can go to my website. You can call me if you want. Give me a phone call. It'd be fun to chat. I'm always happy to be a resource to people, especially folks that are either just getting involved with it, or want some further advice on just like how to start. It's a big world, and it's kind of confusing to get into, but it's really rewarding. No matter what you're doing, collecting specimens or carving or just learning about it. It's fascinating. So yeah, happy to be a resource. Definitely.
On this particular piece of Guatemalan jadeite, Shane, what can you tell us about the origin of this piece?
The jadeite from Guatemala is interesting because it was actually, a lot of people think of the Burmese as really like kind of ancient, and it's old as far as like people working stone. It's relatively new compared to
Right.
especially the Guatemalan stone. I mean, it's
It
been being worked for
is.
far longer. But the fascinating
Yeah.
thing about the Guatemalan jadeite, and I am no expert in this, but it was essentially lost once the sort of pre-Columbian cultures kind of disappeared. The knowledge of jadeite in Guatemala kind of went with them. So for a really long time, and up until like the late 1900s, nobody knew where it was. Like they knew there was jade there. People would find it in the rivers, just small like alluvial like river deposits. But it was kind of a mystery, which I think is kind of cool because it's like, oh, there's hidden treasure. The jadeite was refound. They followed it up from the rivers into the mountains, and currently, right now, a lot of the jadeite is coming from the Montagua River Valley, and I'm not sure if I'm pronouncing that right. Hopefully, I am, and I'm sorry if I butchered it. But that's where most of the Guatemalan jadeite is coming from right now. And it, as I said before, it kind of ranges from these like light blues to blue gray, and there's a whole, some of it's very transparent, some of it's fairly opaque. They do have some kind of like lavender, they tend to call it lilac tones, and even some kind of like lighter like moss and snow, where you've got the real like bright green on a whiter jadeite. They have a wide range of color there.
Wow.
But yeah, it's fairly new to the market. It's something that up until like the last 5 years ago, I wasn't really seeing too much of it. And then, as of 5 years ago, it started to be a little bit easier to get a hold of. I've got some folks that I work with or had worked with in Guatemala. It's gotten a little trickier.
That's really amazing. What an incredible material, and that it has had such significance for so long, and even off and on. And we're not even sure how long the history of Guatemalan jadeite goes back. Not really, and so who knows how many times in the course of human history it's been lost
Totally.
and found like this.
I like to think about just how these cultures all around the world found these stones, and without talking and without having any communication, because the people in Guatemala and the people in China, they didn't talk. Like they weren't
Mm-mm.
communicating about their stonework, and yet they both found this material and were like, "Wow, this is awesome!" And they would carve it into tools and jewelry and all kinds of stuff.
You can take it a step further. What's really mind-blowing is that these civilizations that, like you said, didn't talk, they even believed some of the same things about this stone,
Mm,
using it in burials and
totally.
rituals and believing that it's the key to immortality. These are people who would have never interacted with each other, but they found this stone and they had, for whatever reason, the same, like, feeling about it. And it's like,
Totally
there's something
developed
there.
a culture around it.
Yeah,
Yeah,
yes,
yeah, it's really
absolutely,
neat.
absolutely. Well, and part of that, really, truly, it kinda seems like, "Oh, it's magical and mystical," but from a very realistic perspective, it is such a tough material that the
Totally.
ability to make tools out of it and, items for cooking and weapons and tools, that would create within a culture reverence for the material. And so it's very likely that that's kind of what elevated
Mm,
this sense, this connection, to the jade, whether it be in Guatemala or in China or in New Zealand or in the Swiss lake, like all over the world. Like, you have these crazy similarities, and maybe it really
totally.
is because of the exceptionalism of the material.
Yeah, it truly is. Like, I mean, if you're going to take a natural material and shape it into an axe head, jade is what you'd want to
Yep.
use. And if you had it available, it makes sense that people were like, yeah, this cuts down a tree really good.
Exactly. I did want to make a point to mention that Guatemalan jadeite. This is a good example, right? You said this is kind of a good example of what it looks like,
Yeah,
but it still varies, and like you said, it can come in even different colors. But
totally.
it's not always going to look like this. Just as the BC jade, the nephrite, is not always going to look like this. And I think just seeing them kind of
Hmm.
enhances one's ability to, like, be more intuitive when looking at these materials out in the world. For all of you jade lovers out there who are trying to better understand it and get a better feel for how it looks and how it feels, I hope that these pictures and that this video has been helpful. So, Shane, thank you so much for joining us today, and I can't wait to talk to you next time about omphacite. So everybody, stay tuned for that video, and then I think we probably have even more videos cooking in the works. since Shane is a jade carver. So Shane, how can people reach you? How can they contact you? And more importantly, how can they buy from you?
Yeah, so I have a website, freshwaterjade.com. That's got, that'll have shop updates, upcoming shows that I'm doing either locally or across the states. And then as well as like my little online shop. I have an Instagram that I'm really active on. So, if you do want to chat, hit me up on Instagram. That's one of the better places to find me. And that again, it's going to have shop updates, my little story. If you want to see what I'm doing in the studio that day, you'll probably get a little sneak peek. Not glamorous, quite dusty, but it's fun to see. And then I have an Etsy as well that I update regularly. So there are good jade sellers on Etsy.
There are
is
good
real
jade sellers.
there.
There is
Just
real
make
jade
sure
on
you
Etsy.
know who they are. Yeah,
Yes,
totally.
Shane is one of them.
So,
if you're gonna buy
yeah,
jade on Etsy, make sure it's real jade.
totally.
Yes.
So go find me. I am Freshwater Jade across all those platforms. So you type that into the search bar, you'll find me. It'll be pretty obvious. So
Definitely check him out. Check out his Instagram. Send him a message. Say hey. Tell him that you saw him on Jewels of the Trade, and then go buy something on his Etsy shop. And it's not just rough stuff, guys. Like you can get like for real deal jewelry, like beautiful earrings, beautiful necklaces,
totally.
incredible pieces. So definitely check that out and go shopping. Go nuts.